Hi everyone, my name is William Hicks, and for my final research paper for this course, I decided to explore the topic of smartphone addiction and its relationship to several mental health conditions, depression and anxiety in particular. My exact thesis for the paper is that smartphone addiction does directly worsen and agitate symptoms of anxiety and depression in those who already suffer from these conditions. So in essence, if you are a person who happens to struggle with anxiety and depression and you become addicted to your smartphone, the smartphone addiction can worsen these symptoms and trigger additional symptoms that may not already be there, so it can cause your illness to become even worse. I chose this topic because I feel it's a social issue, particularly in our society, because we are a more developed society. I'm sure all of you have gone out to a restaurant or somewhere public at some point, and if you happen to look around and notice people, they're not always interacting. Their faces are kind of down in their phone, and they may not even be paying attention to the person they're with, or you may have seen this with a group of friends. So it's really prevalent. I noticed it a lot, and so it's something I wanted to dig into a little deeper. I was fortunate during our break here before this class. I traveled to Cuba for 2 weeks and spent 2 weeks there, and that is a nation that is very cut off from internet and technology. I didn't have access to my phone or the internet really the whole time I was there, and I did really notice a difference in my mood. I mean, obviously it's in a beautiful place, with a lot of beautiful people, but I did notice a change in myself without looking at my phone. I try not to look at my phone very much throughout the day, but I'm guilty of it like we all are. But without having access to my phone or the internet at all, I did notice a difference. And it kind of, when I got back and was thinking of ideas for this paper, I thought it would be interesting to kind of look into that and see how our smartphones can affect our mental health and well-being. I did play some clips from the Moby music video, Are You Lost in the World Like Me, at the beginning here. And for those of you that saw my post on the discussion board this past week, I shared the whole video on YouTube, but I think that really sums up my topic here to a T. And that video is very well done. So for this presentation, I'm going to dig deeper into the research that I found here and go over my findings that support my thesis. So for the topic I chose, as I started doing my research, I found a lot of sources and a lot of information pertaining to this topic, which has kind of been, a blessing and a curse. It's great that, I was able to find all my sources, but there's just so much information to sort through because so much research has been done. It's, been a little bit, tough to narrow it down, but just for the sake of this, this assignment, I'm just going to really go through the information in the order I have it organized in my paper, just so it, kind of flows the same way and it's all cohesive. So, as far as my introduction goes, I did kind of go over briefly the history of the smartphone. I mean, obviously everyone knows what a smartphone is, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. Really, the first smartphones were kind of introduced in the late 90s. I'm sure everyone remembers like the Blackberries, that really just were for business purposes, email and things like that. Smartphones as we know them today really came about with the release of Apple's iPhone, which was released in 2007. And there's other models today like Samsung and LG that really all do the same things. What was interesting is that originally it is a cell phone designed for calling and texting, but when I dug a little bit deeper into what people use them for today, those are kind of minimal functions. They're used very minimally compared to what they were even 10 years ago when the first smartphone was released. But the smartphone on its own is really just a tool. It's not something that someone can get addicted to. I did find a good analogy in my research that compared a smartphone to a hammer, where a hammer is a tool. You can use it for something great like building a house, or you can use it as a weapon, just something criminal. So it's really about how it's used. to really, determine whether it's, helpful or harmful. And that's kind of where I started my research. So, I thought it was important to really dig into what people use their phones for to trace where the addictive qualities are. And obviously the biggest thing to come up was the internet there. And even that had to be broken down some. The internet was, integrated into the phone, and it's really what makes the smartphone what it is. This was some of the research I found. As of now, about 12% of all Americans use just their phone to access the internet. So, that means they don't have a computer, they don't have a laptop, anything like that. They're solely using their phone. And, I'm sure we all remember back in the day, you had the desktop computer, you had like the dial-up, it took a while to log on, it was very slow. So, the disadvantages were, it took a while to, do what you were trying to do, but the advantage was, it took time, so you weren't, constantly using it. Part of the issue now is, we have these devices with, blazing fast internet, and they're available everywhere to us. With that desktop computer 10 years ago, you used your internet when you were at home. And there were, issues with that, and some people were addicted. But for the most part, people have to leave the house, people have to go to work and do things. So they weren't on their computer, on the internet, 24 hours a day. Compared to now with, powerful computer in your pocket with, blazing fast access to the internet. That's where part of the problem comes in, is the accessibility. So that was, a portion that I touched on in my paper as well. That really the access to the internet all day, every day. Really, someone can use the internet now every waking moment, regardless of where they are, and that kind of creates some of the problems. So I did, start with some of that information. But to break down the internet portion more, I did research what people are actually using their phones for. And, there's obviously a lot of positive things, like job searching is one of the big things people use it for, like online banking, bill payment, email, the things we use our phones for. So I didn't go into that in too much detail, and I won't here. But one of the big ones that obviously came up that everyone is obviously aware of is social media. And social media addiction is its own topic, and I didn't want to dig really deep into that, but a lot of the research for smartphone addiction did kind of intersect with social media addiction. So, I really just touched on what people use social media for, but I did want to keep the two separate. But they are definitely related in a way, just because social media is so prevalent in everyone's life now, and a smartphone is usually how people access it. So that does come up a lot in the paper here. But just a little bit of the research I did on that, roughly about 82% of adult Americans access social media at some point throughout the day. So the majority of us in this country, adults, look at social media at least once during the day. Now there's different ranges. That's just maybe checking Facebook news, checking like Instagram. There's a lot you can do with social media, Snapchat, like all of that stuff. Social media does account for 28% of all internet usage, so not just for smartphones. And that was very interesting to me, because that's over a quarter of what we use the internet for in general is social media. And from a communication standpoint, social media does seem like a great thing, because of we can communicate with people and globalize the way we really never could before in the past due to this technology. But it's really the way people use it that potentially makes it dangerous. And again, the addictive qualities of social media, there's a couple things there. The unlimited scrolling. If you ever go on somewhere like Instagram or Facebook, you can scroll through your feed and it never ends. It never stops. You can do it. And that's how a lot of people get caught up in the addiction portion of it. And again, I'll get into more detail as far as social media and the issues that it causes with depression. But, this is just kind of a general analysis of, social media and what it's used for. But social media was one of the biggest ones that came up as far as issues that can cause someone to become addicted to their smartphone, because people can become addicted to social media as well. So that's where the two kind of tie together. And I'll get into that more in the next section there. So after doing the research of identifying what smartphone addiction is and identifying the symptoms of it, I then had to tie it to, symptoms of depression and anxiety, as a cause to support my topic. So through my research, I actually found there's been multiple studies conducted in several countries, mainly the United States and Korea, which I found interesting because, the iPhones are manufactured by Apple in the United States, and Samsung, who is also a very large smartphone provider, is based in Korea. So I thought that was interesting. But a lot of studies, were done to link smartphone addiction and, depression and anxiety symptoms. So most of the research was done by conducting surveys for people, some online, some in person, but they would basically rate a person's mood after using certain aspects of their smartphone. So example, they'd have a person use social media for an hour on their phone, and then they would rate their mood after this, and then they may have them rate their mood after doing something non-smartphone related to kind of compare. So most of the research found that there is a link between symptoms of depression and even just symptoms of feeling lonely, isolated, anxious, things like that after using a smartphone for prolonged periods of time. So the research I found really did support that. One research center even developed a scale to measure smartphone addiction. So they could place people on this scale to see just how addicted they were, and then after that tie it in with the the mental health aspect. So I did have to do some research on that as well, the symptoms of anxiety and depression, and researching other types of addiction, such as alcohol addiction and narcotic addiction. It's very similar. Addiction, I found, whether it be a smartphone or whatever else, is similar. And there's also a lot of research out there to, show that, alcoholism and narcotic abuse can lead to depression as well. And I didn't, really get into that too deep in my paper, but just general addiction, it was helpful in kind of, going through that information in forming my paper here. And it definitely supports what I found in relation to smartphone addiction as well. So after gathering all my research, which I think that I found more than enough to, support my argument and my thesis of, smartphone addiction leading to depression and anxiety symptoms, I really kind of wanted to dig into the social issue aspect of it and really come up with some type of solution. I found one source that, kind of touched on the topic of treatment for smartphone addiction. Most of it was just self-control methods, just limiting the amount of time used on a smartphone, which is obviously easier said than done. It's kind of like someone with a gambling addiction saying just don't gamble, obviously. It's not that easy. But I tried to come up with some of my own solutions just based off of, the research. One thing I came up with was, downgrading the device. Going back to what a phone was meant for was really just a phone. Basic phones like the old flip phones and things like that are still available and sold. So someone, suffering from smartphone addiction could just trade in their smartphone and get just a very basic device so they can still call and text, but they're not tempted to use all of the internet functions while they're on the go, which would, then, cut down the depressive symptoms. And if they are suffering from that as a result of the addiction, being more social for one, just going out and really, engaging, because a lot of people go out, but they're still in their phone. So if you really just go out with an effort to be social, maybe even, leaving your phone behind, leaving it in the car. A lot of people have this fear, like, what if I forget my phone? What am I going to do? But cell phones are a new phenomenon. People did survive, since the history of mankind without having to be in touch 24/7. So even just leaving your phone behind and, going out with a group of friends and really just being present, I think it would be rough for someone at first, but over time, I think that could really be helpful. Like I mentioned on my trip, I didn't have access to my phone, and I actually, I had a great time. I enjoyed myself, and it was very present in the moment. And, once you kind of feel that feeling, it's a really good feeling. And I think it would, cure someone's depression, or at least not cure it, but help treat it, I should say, as well as anxiety. And create support groups. You know, there's Alcoholics Anonymous, there's Narcotics Anonymous, so there are these support groups for people struggling from more well-known addictions, but smartphone addiction is becoming more prevalent, especially as the technology gets better. You know, so I think having dedicated groups, even, you know, Smartphone Addicts Anonymous or something like that, this is where people can, you know, get support and realize that they're not alone, because that's one of the biggest problems, you know, when I was, you know, studying the types of addictions and things, is that people feel that they're alone in it. And so if someone realizes, you know, first identifies the problem and realizes that it is, you know, a national problem, a lot of people suffer from this, that they're A, not alone, and then they can, you know, meet with other people, ideally without their smartphones, to talk about smartphone addiction, I think it might be beneficial. So, you know, I included, you know, some of that in my paper, just my own personal thoughts and ideas on how to treat the problem. And you know, hopefully, you know, as more research is done, more treatment options are available. But that really ties my paper and my research together for this project. It was really interesting to learn about and gain more knowledge on, and you know, it's something I would definitely enjoy talking to people about going forward. So thank you for your time, thank you for listening, and I hope everyone else had good luck on their assignments as well.